the cloud. I want to admit the student. Admit all. Okay. All right. Now let me push this down and say, all right. So welcome, everyone. All my students. I've been looking forward to this a long time, ever since Giles accepted my invitation. We became friendly during the pandemic over his book, which he's going to mention in his talk. This is a proper marketing agency. And just like the diagram that we followed in the strategy class, some of you were in my strategy class, Giles and I are of one mind when it comes to how to approach marketing and marketing strategies. So without any further ado, my friend Giles, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tom. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I don't know the dynamic and I don't know the context of everyone showing up for this. So it may be that Tom's forced you to turn up. I don't know what it is, but I do want to
class.
say...
It's class. They have to show up.
They have to show.
Yep.
They have to show. But listen, they don't have to always show, do they? Listen, attention is important, right? And we need to treasure attention. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for giving me their attention. I'm mindful that most of you probably haven't got a clue who I am. And when Professor Tom asked me to talk today, it was such an easy yes. I'm a huge fan of Tom's. I'm a huge fan of this industry and doing what I can to improve this industry. And I think that, talking to people who are potentially going to be joining this crazy world that we work in is a great opportunity to do just that. So it becomes a case of, what do I focus on? What do I focus on? I want to talk to, and I want to kind of warn people joining this industry of things to avoid and things to be aware of. And it's quite unusual for me to do a talk to people at your level. I usually, oh, hang on, this isn't working. What's going on? Bear with. There we go. Can you see that slide deck okay?
Yes. Yep.
Ah, cool. So I usually do a talk where I zoom in on one specific thing, and I like this one, which I think, Tom, you turned up for, right? It was an early morning one during lockdown, and I think you had to get up at 3 a.m. or whatever. Yes. And so an example is stop talking about being brave and convincing clients to be brave, because humans have evolved to avoid risk, and because we avoid risk, we've managed to evolve and we've survived as a species. And the very way we operate as agencies or consultants is just batshit crazy. Hence the paradoxical undressing line here. We do loads and loads of things in this industry which just doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't make sense to talk about being brave. It doesn't make sense to talk about risk. When really the risky thing is looking and sounding like everyone else, right? If you're a brand competing for market share, competing for attention in this sea of sameness, it's not brave to take a risk. It's about being right. So we don't need to unpack more on that. These are just a couple of other talks that I do. So another talk I do is I talk quite angrily at the way we trade creativity. So this particular talk that I gave for the marketing meetup last year, I'm reliably told by its founder, Joe, that it's led to a lot of creative businesses adopting innovative and dynamic pricing. You had the pleasure of speaking to the handsomest indie agency owner, Nick Ellis, on Monday about commercial creativity, I believe. Yes. But most creative agencies charge in units of time, but time is not the right measure. This literally never happens, right? Time is a measure of input. It's not a measure of output, and it's certainly not a measure of outcomes. Like, no one judges movies by their length. No one judges songs by how long they are. No one looks at paintings and thinks that painting took 2 weeks longer, therefore it's better. And yet most businesses in our industry use time-based rate cards. creativity is one of the last legal unfair advantages we have against our competitors, right? So charge for the magic, not for the time it takes to do the magic. You can look at time rate base cards in so many different ways, but whichever way you look at it, it just doesn't make any sense. So if we're solving a big problem for a client, they should pay us a premium to solve it quicker, not slower. There's just so many conflicts, but there's too many areas to unpack here, and I could easily rant for ages about this, and it's probably not one that's relevant to you guys today. But there are lots of things I want you to know. So putting this talk together has been quite unusual for me. It's a case of how do I take my experience of running an agency for 14 years and zoom out and try and cover lots of important things. So I hope it works. I hope I touch on a few things that stick. I arrived at this title somewhat lazily as a way of suggesting that, you know, these ramblings of an erratic fool which you're about to suffer were somehow more well curated and orderly and linear, these kind of words of wisdom. And I sent that title to Tom a few days ago. I thought it was nice and simple and, you know, quite tidy, but to be honest, it's too tidy. And so I changed it earlier today to this: how to avoid playing chess with pigeons. One of my favorite metaphors is arguing with idiots is like playing chess with a pigeon. It doesn't matter how well you play, the pigeon will shit all over the board and strut around like it won anyway. There are lots of pigeons in this industry selling their idiotic wares and beliefs, from your digital only marketers, your performance marketers, your purpose peddlers, all manner of privacy invading ad tech. And you will, if you enter this industry, find yourself playing chess with them. So know that the things I'm about to go through with you now, and recognize when to step away from the board, because you will go insane if you entertain it. But just to show you that I'm not a pigeon, I don't claim to not be an idiot. I've been called far worse. I'm going to run through a few creds of sorts. Now, creds are really boring. It's like, you look, I've won this award, I've done this, like, who cares? But I think it is important that I just show you a few things that I do, or few things that I've, you know, done recently that might give you some confidence. So my agency, GASP, as Professor Tom says, practices proper marketing. It's a term we came up with 14 years ago, and it's been stolen by the likes of Mark Ritson, and he knows how I feel about that. But we turned 14 3 months ago, and these are some posters that we ran to celebrate our 13th, which was the start of our teenage years. So we are just warning clients of how our behavior might change, right? We are creatively memorable and boringly effective. That's our strap line. And we've done loads of creatively memorable things. So bottom left, I was telling Tom, can I call you Tom, Professor Tom?
Absolutely.
Tom, earlier, Rory Sutherland, some of you might be familiar with bottom left. That was him a few weeks ago, rocking out to some air guitars we were giving away for free. We have launched a incredible soccer ball that stores kinetic energy that's generated from play that you can then plug in to power lights, and, you know, so people don't have to burn dangerous kerosene oil and all sorts of things in the third world. And there's your man Obama playing with it on BBC News when it first came out. We've delivered rubbish in the post. We created rain-activated ads that would appear in dry stencils. We've sent reindeer all across Europe, cardboard engineered reindeers. We have, oh, my slide deck keeps stalling. We've got currently we have 3 best-selling books. We started publishing books about 4 years ago now, and the reason we did it was because, and it comes on to the similar point I'm going to make when I talk about the podcast, is there's a danger of, I found, where I was getting increasingly cynical and struggling with the amount of nonsense in this industry. And doing the podcast allowed us to turn the volume up on people who spoke truth and who spoke sense and who spoke about proper marketing. And our books are similar. They're a good way to seed common sense into all manner of libraries, universities, offices around the world. The sequel to the top book, Delusions of Grandeur, is dropping imminently. I've thrown a few spreads in now just to give you a flavour of the book, mostly for Tom, because he was a huge supporter of our first book. Dave Trott read it last week and said this amazingly lovely line, which is kind. It's all carny themed, given we've so many clowns in this industry to avoid. It's full of daft little comic strips. It's full of daft templates. There's a template for every men's watch ad there. I don't know if you can make that out.
Yes.
Some crap about astronauts or pilots. It's got diagrams. It's got flow charts. Can we stop using the phrase "make a difference"? I mean, can we just stop? Right? It's that, or reimagined, or redefined. It's everywhere. And then the podcast. So, somehow our podcast Call to Action is in the top 1% of podcasts in the world for listeners. We have just over 200,000 listeners now. It's insane. Now, 99% of podcasts are shit, and we're lucky. So I think that's why we are where we are. But give it a whirl. I'm on it, but don't let that put you off. I just host. It's all about the guests. And then quickly, the last thing I want to talk about that GASP does or has done is this is something that I launched during the pandemic. And one of the things I'm most proud of as an agency, Isolated Talks. It was an initiative to creatively support mental health. It was quite clear early on to me anyway, as someone who has a mental health journey of sorts, that the enforced isolation that was being forced on people was a ticking time bomb, and yet it wasn't being recognised, certainly in the UK media and the UK press. So Isolated Talks set about trying to normalise the state of isolation and create a community centred around inviting people to donate Isolate TED Talks, so TED Talks from isolation, and normalising the appearance of people being at home, often on their own, in isolation, in probably a less curated state than you would see them on, say, Instagram. And it was fortunately and thankfully picked up, and it was a huge success. It's generated over £3 million worth of media donations. And what we've done with that media is we've found and pointed it at different for good initiatives. So this is an ad that we've run using donated for media, supporting a diversity and inclusion charity called DICE. We have done the same with Life After Prisons charity and various other for good entities, because we find ourselves in the privileged position now where people want to carry on the core message of Isolated Talks, and we're able to kind of pass that privilege on. Crucially, the Isolated Talks, from a marketing perspective, has 150 plus talks from some of the best minds in Adland. They're all free to watch. They form part of university syllabuses all around the world. They're even in Mark Ritson's mini MBA courses. So please do check them out. We've got testimonials, right? But who hasn't got testimonials? These are all good. They're from great people like Mark Ritson. We're lucky enough to think highly of us. Steve Harrison, I'm not sure if that's a name you're familiar with, but do look him up. He's won more Cannes Lions than anyone else. The show off. He won them back in the day when Cannes Lions actually meant something, not the the pay to play nonsense, which I think it's fair to say they are today. We're not for everyone, but nor should we be. So back to my talk. So listen, my wife took me to see this play recently, Dr. Semmelweis. She actually took me to see Mark Rylance, who's the actor you can see there, because he's probably one of the finest actors, I think, that has ever graced this land. I had no idea of the story. She just knew I was a fan of his, and we went to see it. If you're not familiar, Dr. Semmelweis, he basically discovered bacteria, but he didn't know what it was. He didn't come up with the name bacteria. He just realized that and came up with a practice that avoided bacteria spreading in maternity wards. And in the process, he dropped the mortality rate from about as high as 20%, 1 in 5 mother and child mortality rate in these wards. And he dropped it to less than 1%. But his story is tragic, right? So few medical professionals would even entertain his findings. He ended up in a loony asylum, and he was dead 40 years before his findings were even accepted by the medical world. And it got me thinking about rules and laws and science and facts and evidence and all the things that we have in our industry that are routinely ignored. And it's very frustrating the way that marketing doesn't use precedent. We don't use precedent. And it reminded me of this story. Now, this is a timeline. Again, it's really morbid, but I promise I'm going to cheer things up in a minute, or I'm going to try to at least. This is a timeline in 1799, President George Washington's final evening. He woke up at 2 a.m. with an inflamed throat, and his doctor of 40 years arrived on the scene and fortunately knew how to treat the condition. And it was the same as if he had a fever or consumption or madness. And he immediately applied leeches and drained 14 ounces of blood. 2 hours later, the symptoms got worse. Another doctor, Dr. Alicia Dick, arrived. They applied more leeches and drained another 18 ounces of blood. I'm going to do this quickly because I think you're going to guess the pattern. More doctors arrived. There's significant timestamps here where more leeches were applied, and ultimately it needed an emergency procedure to save his life. They got all of the best medical minds in the country, and they chose to use the full extent of measures known to them. And over the next few hours, they applied more leeches and drained another 32 ounces of blood. All told, they drained more than 80 ounces of blood in UK currency. That's 5 pints, half of his body's total supply, and they just kept going. As a result of the treatment, he died at 10 p.m. And this is the bit that really hits home, right? After his death, his doctor admitted that their treatment might possibly have been flawed. It really hits home. So what bothers me is I can draw parallels with something so significant and move to the really trivial world of marketing. Is we don't widely use precedent. The medical world does, the legal world certainly does, and it seems absurd now, knowing what we know. In a generation's time, we'll look back and think how absurd that so many performance marketers thrived in the last decade. But the truth is, we already have the intel. So we are already applying leeches and we know it's not right. So if we look at the empirical evidence, and I'm going to touch on lots of people and lots of things because time isn't on our side. So do look this up and check that I'm not just bullshitting you. Look up the methodology. It is all sound, and it's important that you're aware of the validity. Read Jeremy Bullmore. Jeremy Bullmore sadly passed away recently, but he's one of the best minds our industry has ever had. An archive of his work can be accessed freely, and this is a quote from one of his best talks, Posh Spice and Purcell. And he's talking about how tricky it is for people to understand brands. Now, what we do in marketing, and I gave a talk at both my daughter's school recently to a bunch of 8-year-olds. So I was trying to think, how can I really simplify marketing? And I came up with something that's actually I'm really happy with because it's really stuck. And that is, marketing is memory management. It's memory management. And if we look at that from a few angles, it rings true with loads of really important things. And the mind, therefore, is such an important search engine. If we play a little make-believe kind of what-if scenario, imagine you're in Dublin in Ireland and you're inside an old pub, Mulligan's, and an Irish barman waddles over and asks what you're going to drink, what you want to drink, you're not going to get your phone out and Google what should I drink in a pub in Dublin. Your mind is going to come up with like a little mental shortlist of options, and your brain retrieves those options from its memory. And your memory is formed by all sorts of experiences over, you know, your lifetime, some more significant than others. And it creates this shortlist. And then you ultimately, depending on what you like and what you don't like, many people will end up with Guinness because you're in a pub in Dublin. If I did a quick test now and said to you all right now, I want all of you right now to buy a new pair of trainers, sneakers, whatever, and I want you to tell me what you want to buy right now and I'll buy them for you. Now, your brain will likely present a selection of maybe 3, maybe up to 6 brands, and you will almost certainly decide on one of those. And this is what's happening. Jenny Womack's name came up earlier, and this is one of the best quotes I think that I can possibly use to explain what's happening inside the brain. There's effectively 2 states. You're either in the room, which is that short list, or you're trying to get in the room. Most brands, and I'm talking about every sector, B2B, B2C, charity, whatever it might be, all sectors, most brands aren't in the room. And most brands need to focus on getting into people's minds, getting into the room. Jenny goes on to say that most organizations are failing to get in the room, but they're spending all their money on arguing as if they are already there. Which is true, and it's a point on all those marketers out there applying metaphorical leeches, but this point comes up time and time again. And this idea of the 2 different states is echoed in so many people's work. So there's a term which is really important and that is split into many, many different ways. Bothism is something that Mark Ritson talks about often and probably started doing so relatively recently. And these are just different ways that it might manifest and be spoken about. But Bennett and Field and their work with the IPA talk about long and short. You've got the likes of Ehrenberg Bass Institute, where Jenny Womack and Byron Sharp operate. You've got the LinkedIn B2B Institute. There's all sorts of language here. Some of it isn't proprietary language and it's not owned by anyone, and nor should it be. And they all make the same points. I've always preferred, and what I've always used in my agency world, is watering the tree and picking the fruit. There's something so beautifully simple about that metaphor that just works for me, and just works when you're talking to clients of all shapes and sizes. So future sales, existing sales, top of funnel, bottom of funnel. Talking about future sales is so much less fluffy than talking about brand awareness or future. You're actually talking about sales. You're talking about conversions. You're talking about commercials. That is just helps you get taken so much more serious as a marketer. Once you're in the room and you're part of that mental availability shortlist, you're in what Phil Barden would call no-brainer territory. Now, no-brainer is another great term to think about how the mind chooses brands. These 2 brain scans show what happens in the brain when decisions are being made. Now, which of these 2 brain scans do you think shows the brain of someone choosing their favorite brand on that shortlist, and which is the same person choosing a less familiar, less favored brand? I don't need you to tell me that the answer is contrary to what most marketers assume, probably not contrary to what you assume, given the long build-up I've given it. But the favored brand is the one on the right, where less activity is going on in the mind. People often get this wrong. Performance marketers and brand love professionals will get this wrong because they think that the more hotspots and the more kind of neural activity is probably because people love our brands so much. But no-brainer decisions they're automatic and they're lazy. Our brains are lazy. and they're always looking to conserve energy by taking shortcuts, and brands are shortcuts. Humans outsource cognitive load, we create patterns, we compartmentalize. It's why if you've ever tried a new meat for the first time, it tastes like chicken, even if it doesn't. You're trying to put it in somewhere, you're trying to put it in a filing system that already exists in your brain. And that's why brands are so important, because they let people do that really simply, and they let you make really familiar decisions. So brands that, you know, that we're exposed to more and more, we will increasingly trust. And in helping us make those decisions, they reduce that cognitive load when we're out shopping and making fairly trivial decisions, when really we want to be with our friends and family and all the important stuff. This also hints at something else that Rory Sutherland talks about, called maximizers versus satisficers. We all, mostly all, would like to believe that when we purchase as maximizers, which means we go out and we make decisions based entirely on maximizing the potential value that we can get from a purchase. But in practice, we're almost always satisficers, which is to say we look for what's least likely to be shit. And they're not the same thing. We opt for least likely to be bad over most likely to be brilliant. They're not the same thing. We're trying to reduce risk. McDonald's, for example, isn't brilliant food, but it's very, very good at not being bad. And it's very good at consistently being exactly the same, always, across continents even. Now, there's loads of examples. McDonald's is just the one that comes to mind first. And there are also, it's important to say, different category types that differ. So, you know, engagement rings or cars, right? If I'm buying an engagement ring, I'm going to try and be a maximizer because that's a much more emotive, significant purchase. But mostly, we don't buy that way. We're satisficers. Again, this is another way of looking at exactly the same thing, Bothism. And in this instance, this manifests in LinkedIn's language, the B2B Marketing Institute. They have what is called the 95-5 rule, but the cost of living crisis has probably made that closer to 99-1. It's particularly true in B2B or business, but it's also very relevant to consumer markets. So, for example, this is my iPhone. Every 4 years, I think, I upgrade my phone, or my contract runs and I get a new one. So every 4 years, let's just assume that's the norm, I'm in the market for a phone. So that's 1 in every 4 years. So I'm 25% likely in any given year to be in a position to actually buy a phone. But there's 12 months in a year, right? So that's 2% of any month I'm in the market. So let's just say 98% to 2% is the not in the market and in the market for that product. The point is, the majority of people are not in the market right now. So those marketing activation gurus, those performance marketers, those people who are really scrapping over those sales today, they're fighting over a tiny portion of the market, because most of the market aren't in the market. But the minds of those people, their memories, their associations, what they understand of your brand, what they think of when they see your brand communications, is still so important. The long term is so important. Most of them already know which brands are in the room anyway. So they're wasting a lot of time, all of these SEO and brand performance marketers, because they're trying to affect a sale when often you've already made that your mind up before you became that 2%. So understanding and seeing these things as future sales is important. a lot of the time when you're marketing and when we're working with our clients is geared towards creating future demand and priming customers who will enter the category in the future. We can, of course, harvest existing demand with sales activation and performance marketing, because there is a point to that. That is important. Sales are vital, right? But you're missing the bigger trick if you're only focusing on sales today. We must convert customers who are ready to buy now, but ultimately the majority we need to influence so that they do buy later. So we need to think about both. We need to think about spending enough to be effective. We need to build and use distinctive brand assets. Have you guys taught much about mental and physical availability?
Not in this class. This is
So
a marketing.
that's fine.
Yeah, this is what we do. This is a marketing campaigns and special events class, but we do touch on some of those important things like mental and physical availability.
Cool. Okay, so Colin Lewis, so a friend of Tom and mine, he once said when I was in conversation with him, talking about mental and physical availability, it's a line that originates from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And if you haven't come across it yet in those textbooks or in class, you will come across it and you will almost trip over it. Its frequency is so high, but it just sounds a bit too, like it's trying to be a bit too clever. And Colin Lewis did what Colin always does, and he translated it into simple Irish English. And he said, what? You mean make it easy to think of and buy stuff? That's all it is. Make it easy to think of and buy things. It's literally just that. So physical availability is basically making something easy to get your hands on. So that could be via a physical shop, via distribution channels, or it could even be online. So Amazon's buy now button is an absolutely incredible piece of physical availability, because you're making something just that one click away from physically owning that product. That's much easier to understand and something that is probably less significant for the purposes of this conversation. But mental availability is really, really important for all marketers, especially when you're planning your campaigns. So again, how do we do that? We lean into science and psychology and all sorts of precedent. There was, a Professor von Restorff, and her work, which is almost a century ago now, proved that when multiple homogeneous stimuli are presented, the stimulus, so the thing being shown that differs the most from the rest, is more likely to be remembered. It's why, I've got one here somewhere, highlighter pens. It's why highlighter pens exist, right? We want to highlight our notes. We want to highlight things to remember them. So when we look back, they stand out. Now, you can file that under no shit, Sherlock, I understand, but you have to look around and see where you can benefit from that type of thing. So in this slide, there are over 25 sheep in that picture, but your brain will remember two. It will remember a black sheep and it will remember a white sheep. And that's it. Your brain does this. You're trying to compartmentalize. You're trying to find the pattern to make things easier for your brain. And now I know this is really, really simple and it seems so obvious. But if you go out there and you look at ads for all sorts of different sectors, consumer products especially, they all look and sound the same. They use the same language. To add a layer of context there, this is exactly the same thing. This information on screen now is exactly the same as those X's and O's that I just showed you. If I took this slide away in a minute's time and asked you all to remember what was there, I bet a far higher percentage of you all will remember elephant than will remember one particular color. It increases your chances of being not only seen, but being remembered, and increases your chances of being in the room. If you imagine that was 10 adverts on telly, like back to back in an ad break, the commercial significance of standing out and being distinct is huge, because what you've got if we just bounce back to this, because it's easier to make the point, you've got 50% of the recall, 50% for 10% of the spend. You are only 1 in 10 ads, but you're also 1 in 2 because you stand out and you're distinct. And that's the huge commercial advantage. And that's why when you're planning campaigns, you need to think about being distinct, and you need to maximize your chances of being remembered and sticking in the brain. The risk is sameness. That's the risk. Or, as we say at GASP, be more party cannon. So that Crayola logo there, that's a Scottish death metal band, and they seemingly understand distinctive brand assets better than, you know, many marketing execs practicing marketing, it seems. Now, I know this is a really, you know, simple, arguably trivial example, but the effect is relevant to language, to tone of voice, to, you know, words that you use, sounds, colors, logos, shapes, smells, you name it. When we work with our clients and our brands, and we're building a brand and a strategy and ultimately leading into a campaign, we get all of the component parts of every competitor in the competitive set, and we analyze them all. We look at the words they use, the frequency of those words. We use at how they present themselves, both visually and verbally. We look at sonic cues, which is your sounds that might be part of a jingle. And it's only then, once we've studied it, that we can actually plan and effectively be distinct. I know I'm going really quickly. I'm sorry. I've just got so much in my brain to just spill out, and I'm hoping some of it sticks. The other thing, though, is that it's not just a case of getting in the room. You've got to stay in the room, okay? So this is the best example I could find for Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. So again, this has been studied and sorry, this has been carried out at a significant sample size to show how quickly people forget certain stimuli. Memories fade. So it's not just a case of being distinct that one time to get in the room. You need to then stay in the room. It's why you should never turn the advertising tap completely off if you can help it, because the momentum that you've built over time is really hard to generate from a standing start. But once it's going and you're refreshing those memories, you reinforce the consumer's choice, you reinforce their association to the brand, and it's how you stay in the room, and it's how you gain that competitive advantage. This is going to show me and Tom to be the oldest people on the call, but RIP Blockbuster. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Blockbuster. You're all probably too young and fresh-faced.
No, as a matter of fact, one of these students is going to be working on a Blockbuster campaign. I can say no more. I'm sworn to secrecy, but I sent this, by the way, I sent this slide to that person who shall remain anonymous. So yeah, we know it.
Sweet.
We're doing something about it.
Nice. Okay. But I mean, there we go. I mean, the fact that everybody, without question, who I've shown this with in the office, knew it within a second. Now, Blockbuster hasn't been trading in the UK for years now, and I don't know whether it's the same in the US, but it's almost irrelevant. The point is that it was so distinct and it was so well managed for a time, not as a business, I understand that, but as a brand, that it's still in the room. I'm running low on time, I think, so I'm going to step away from this and distinctive assets. I'm going to run through, this is more like, I suppose, greatest hits of a slide deck, where there's things that have come up and I presented to clients in meetings. So I'm just going to introduce you to causation cat. Be careful in this industry of thinking just because two things appear to correlate that one was caused by the other. We know the cat hasn't done that to the road, and yet so many times in this industry you see people, it could be people taking credit for a campaign win, or again, I know that, I mean, Tom's primed me to bash performance marketers a little bit here, but if you imagine you're a performance marketer who's just claimed credit for selling a BMW car because the last attrition point was an ad you placed on a website and someone clicked it, you're assuming that all of the stuff that happened in that person's lifetime ahead of buying the car was irrelevant. In sports terms, it would be like putting an American football team out with 11 quarterbacks because the quarterback's always the MVP. Like, it's that mad. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. In football, in my language, in soccer, it's like saying that guy scores all the goals. Let's have 11 of him in his position, 11 strikers on the pitch. It just doesn't make sense. And yet it tends to happen more frequently than you'd like to admit. I'd like to admit. I interviewed a guy once from GlaxoSmithKline from GSK, and he told me a wonderful story about Ribena, which is, again, I don't know whether Ribena is familiar with you guys. It's essentially a drink. It's a blackcurrant cordial juice drink that's really popular here. And he was telling me a story about 1 year they had record sales. It was the biggest sales number since they started, since they launched Ribena. Now, everybody in the business wanted to take credit. So the brand and marketing team said it was their new revised logo. The product team said it was their new distribution channels. The sales guy said it was their pricing. Everyone had a stake and everyone was claiming it was because of them. And they basically found out over the next few years and studying different contexts of the year that they just had, that it was just the hottest year on record. So people were drinking more drinks. Every drink pretty much had their record year. And so just be careful when you're interpreting data. Be careful not to force two to join unnecessarily. Another slide that I love: your customers aren't just your customers. This is a real photo. So anyone who works at Nike or Adidas might not like to see this, but just know your buyers, they also buy from competitors, and we just have to deal with that. Nobody likes parachutes. Subjectivity is one of the biggest problems that we face continually as an agency. And the way we get around it is we show this slide, and we've shown this slide every time we have worked with a new client for at least a decade now. And every time it's worked perfectly. You just say to a client, I'm about to show you some creative work or even some strategy. I don't need you to like it. I just need you to understand it works like a parachute. Nobody likes parachutes. They work or they don't. It's nice if people like things, but it's really not important. And that'll be true with your campaign planning. It just needs to work. Know your F words, your effectiveness and your efficiency. We're so caught up in efficiency metrics ever since digital kind of exploded, all manner of different applications and contexts for us to work in and different digital tools. We're tripping over ourselves to make things more efficient, whether it's your engagements, whether it's the impressions, whether it's the open rates, whatever it is. And yet we get caught up in that. And yet, just because those metrics can be neatly presented in a spreadsheet, it doesn't mean they're right. A good example is when it comes to things like best practice. So best practice is a I was going to say it's a horrible term. It's not a horrible term. It's just horrible if you follow it to the letter of the law, because you will then join this sea of sameness. I've lost count how many times people have said to me, or clients have said to me, we're doing an email newsletter. Should it be HTML or plain text? And it doesn't matter, right? I subscribe to Ad Contrarian, Bob Hoffman's emails, and I couldn't care less if he did the email in HTML plain text or he shouted it through my letterbox, which isn't beyond Bob. It's the content that matters, and sadly the tools that we use in marketing have allowed us to get distracted. We need to think long and short. There's a wonderful parallel in the behavior of bees. They have an efficient way of communicating about the direction of reliable food sources called the waggle dance, and a significant proportion of the hive seems to ignore it altogether and just journeys off on random. And this baffled scientists for years. They wondered why 20 or 10 million years of bee evolution had not forced a more compliant behavior. But what they discovered was fascinating. This will make sense in a minute to you. they discovered that without these rogue bees ignoring the waggle dance, that the bees would get caught up in what complexity theorists call a local maximum. And they would become so efficient at collecting food from the known sources that ultimately, when those existing sources of food dried out, they wouldn't know where to go next, and the hive would starve to death. So those rogue bees are, in a sense, the R&D department, and it pays off handsomely, that inefficiency, when they discover a fresh source of food. It's precisely because they do not concentrate on maximizing efficiency that bees have survived so long. And it comes back to watering the tree and picking the fruit. You can't just keep picking the fruit. You need to water the tree. I'm almost at the end now. I think we're slightly running over. Apologies. Last point, and this is another really powerful thing. Okay, buddy. Peacock's feathers and costly signaling. So Peacock's feathers really angered Darwin. He once said, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick." And it troubled him because his theory of survival of the fittest would suggest that peacocks should have evolved a shorter tail that made it easier to escape predators. And their tails completely contradicted that. And it wasn't until the 1970s, that there was a biologist at Tel Aviv University, and he developed this theory of costly signaling. And according to him, the costly signals are much harder to fake, and they're therefore so much more believable. Advertising works in the same way. A message that is communicated at scale, indiscriminately, like a TV spot, a Super Bowl ad, for example, it works harder because I know others have seen it too. And I know it was costly. And because I know it was costly, my brain knows that that brand has confidence in the long-term viability of their product and of their brand. It's like a racehorse owner betting on his own horse. In the words of an Oxford economist, convincingly signals the quality of the product by displaying the producer's faith in its own output. So the context of the message really, really matters, which is why what people kind of still see as traditional advertising is ultimately remains so much more effective than the new easy media, that kind of one-to-one type communications. One of the best ways of explaining that I've ever heard is unsurprisingly Rory Sutherland, which is a real jab to the ribs of your kind of activation and performance marketers. And he says, "When we get married, we say our vows in public spaces in front of a large group of friends and family. We don't go door to door." I'll leave you with one of my favorite slides that we use at GASP, and I commonly use with clients when talking about costly signaling. Now, there's a missing caption here that reads, "The fourth little pig's house was made of wolf skulls. It wasn't very sturdy, but it sent a fucking message."
Awesome. All right, let's oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, let everybody know how they could find you.
One thing I meant to say at the start, we have a rule at GASP, and it's one that we all have to follow, and it's especially relevant when we hire new talent and new people start, which is you have to ask stupid questions, because stupid questions lead to all sorts of amazing places that, you know, expected questions don't. So I don't expect everyone to feel like they want to hurl questions at me, but I do want to encourage everyone to ask any question that they might want to, because, you know, that's what we're here for.
I'm going to stop the screen share. Hold on a second.
I can do that here as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, you could do it. Okay, awesome. All right, if everybody would turn on their cameras. Giles is asking if anybody has any questions about anything that you saw here, maybe something that you think about. This is the perfect person to ask that question to. So anybody, you can put it in the chat box if you want, or you can just take yourself off mute. We're going to give you a chance. So who wants to go first? What? Giles, they're shy for some reason. I don't know. Generally, someone asks a question or two. Anybody? Man, I don't like this. They just had this most incredible presentation. All right, well, I'll ask a question. Advice for marketers starting out in the field. What would you share for folks that are just beginning their careers?
In terms of getting into agency world?
Well, I'd say in succeeding, as a young marketer, what advice would you give?
I've got lots of bits of advice, I think, which I hope are relevant. I would certainly, unsurprisingly, study the past. I was on a podcast not long ago called The Brief Bros, which is an American pair of ad folk who you might be familiar with, Tom.
I am.
And they were asking me about brief templates, advertising brief templates, and what templates we use within our business. And I answered honestly and said that the ones we use date back to the 1970s and 1960s. There's two templates which I adore. One is from BBH and one is from JWT. And the point I made to them, which is a little bit pithy, but mostly true, is that far smarter people have spent years and years working on this stuff. I don't need to reinvent it. I don't need to do it. And there's things like those brief templates. There's things like JWT's planning guide, which was written by an amazing planner called Stephen King, not the author.
We shared. It was shared. It was shared in our class. They had it the first week.
Perfect.
The Stephen King Planner's Guide is in our D2L.
Perfect. Exactly that. Yeah. So we had that transcribed and reprinted, and we've had it printed and we share it with clients and whatever, because the logic and the smarts in it are timeless. The tools change in marketing. The tools change all of the time, and it's wonderful to have new tools, but the tools are just that. They are just tools to affect humans, and humans have evolved at a rate that is barely noticeable over thousands and thousands of years. So study the past, see what's out there, study JWT's guide, understand humans, do a little bit of digging around behavioral science and psychology. So Rory Sutherland's name's come up a few times. I've just interviewed the guy who introduced Rory to behavioral science. There's so much out there, and it will touch on things like costly signaling, which we had showed at the end, and a few other things. The reason they're important is because human beings aren't logical. Like, we behave in really often irrational ways. And if you understand how people behave, then it will make your job as a marketer so much better and so much more effective. There's one example that is it might be Richard Shotton's book, The Choice Factory. Either way, it's a wonderful story, and it's a true story. It's a restaurant in France, a really high quality Michelin star restaurant in France, had a problem where their customers were ignoring the sign in the entrance which read, "Please turn off your mobile phones on entry." And this luxury experience was being ruined by people having their phone go off at regular times. And a behavioral science expert suggested they changed the sign. And they changed the sign, and it worked immediately at 100% success. And all the sign said was, "Please remember to turn your phone back on when you leave." And it's just understanding how we receive information, that implication that the norm is to have your phone off. Nobody questioned it. People don't like being told what to do. It's exactly the same intended outcome, but the opposite language. So I would study that. I would study humans, behavioral science.
All right. Any questions? Oh, I got one in the chat box. What is the first thing you look at in a new campaign when you start one?
Great question, Noah. We follow the three stages of proper marketing. The research, then strategy, then tactics. So that research is often not just research; it's diagnosis. It's understanding where we're at. It's understanding the market. It's understanding the company, and it's understanding their competitors. And we study that quite ruthlessly, even if we're not being asked to do a research project. This is, I think, a key point for us, and a key point to understand is, don't expect to be asked to do a research project. Just assume you're going to research as part of your solution. But research is everything. So we would look at that and understand the context of the market. We would definitely drill into the objectives. What are we actually trying to achieve with this campaign? Are the objectives, are they right? Are they smart objectives? Are they measurable? Are they the right measures? These KPIs, whatever they might be, and are they realistic? Probably the first things we would look into. We've got more questions. Amazing.
Yeah. All right. So you can see them, Giles. You want to take them?
Yeah. So Lindsay's next. Thanks, Lindsay, for asking the question. Do you think reverse psychology works better in marketing? I don't know. It's a good question. I think it depends on the context of the message. So sometimes, and in that example I gave, I suppose if that's what you mean by reverse psychology, I'm assuming that's the point you're making, then yeah, in that instance, absolutely it did. But I wouldn't think of it as reverse. I would think of it as, humans, we're very much a kind of herd species. We like to have a feeling of belonging. We don't like isolation, which I suppose is a nod back to isolated talks. Like, we don't like that. That's very it's not a good thing for us to deal with. So in that instance, implying that normally people have their phone off simply gave you the opportunity to join the larger sample of people, that larger tribe. It's why we so enthusiastically follow something that allows us to be a group, whether that's a music band, whether that's a sports team, whether that's even a religion, perhaps. All of those things, and I appreciate they're very different, all of those things have that one consistent thing, which is they give you that herd, and they give you that group. So I think it's just marketing. I think it's just psychology, really. Why do you think Blockbuster has stayed so popular as a brand, even though its business failed? Great question. I think it's popular because, well, it's definitely popular because of the product type and the category type, because those around us, and I'm much older than I look, remember going to Blockbuster and choosing a video, and the context around that would have been a weekend, or it would have been a special occasion. So I think there's so many positive things associated with the experience of consuming Blockbuster, if you like, which would definitely made it popular. The brand also was very, very well branded. It was very distinct. I can't think of many logos which are angled in that way. Like there's the kind of ticket shape was very distinct, wasn't very common. There's loads of things around it which are distinct and will remain in people's heads. So I think it was definitely effective as well as popular. What is your agency's vision for the future? How do you plan to adapt to the evolving marketing industry? We plan to do the opposite, Lee. Is that Lee? Abby? Sorry. We plan to do the opposite in a way, which, again, I'm not trying to sound overly smart with that answer, but it's true. When I started the business with my wife 14 years ago now, plus, we we were excited by all of the emerging media, and we started. I mean, I still remember when, you know, social media first existed and digital first existed, and like this explosion of stuff was really exciting, both as a consumer, as someone who was able to use those tools in my day-to-day life. And we actually suspected they would be more significant than they were. What we realized quite quickly was that the abundance and almost overwhelming amount of tools available to us was causing chaos in the industry. People would think that the tactics were the answer. They would think that just because we can now easily produce video, that video marketing was the answer and that was the strategy. And so where we're going with the future is we're actually remaining true to the traditional practice of marketing. There's a nod back to, you know, JWT's planning guide. There's something that predates that called McElroy's memo, which was written in, I think, 1934 by a chap who worked at Procter and Gamble. This memo, if you Google it, is available today. And he basically invented brand management in a memo that he wrote internally about how he was going to manage a brand. Now, the principles of that really are diagnosis or research, build a strategy, and then that strategy informs your tactical choices. And I think, if anything, where we are now has taught us and given us more confidence that the future is very much that. Everyone else has gone around here and got a bit lost in all these different corridors, but the future is very much the past in that respect. Am I right to just keep smashing through these, Tom?
Yeah. Because, see, the class ends at 5:40 Eastern Standard Time officially. So if you're okay with it, Giles, and my students ask questions.
Yeah, I'm good.
Let's keep on trucking.
No, I love it. I'm chuffed everyone's asking questions. Thank you, everybody. I think that's Malik. I hate saying people's names wrong, so please accept my apology if I have gutted your name. I am an idiot. Do you think building new ideas off past successful campaigns using it is the best way to be successful? Listen, I don't know if it's the best way to be successful. I do think we can learn a lot from past successful campaigns. There's a great quote. I think it's Ogilvy who talks about David Ogilvy, who talks about the thing in our industry is that the very thing that can make an idea work and successful is its originality, or often is its originality. And it can therefore be the very same thing that makes it impossible to replicate because it's already been done. So I don't think there's like a cheat code when it comes to trying to recreate past campaigns. I do think putting a new spin on it, so there might be a successful historic campaign or positioning statement or an association with your brand that you can translate into new technology and new media. I think that's a great place to start. Yeah, like thinking about it just for another split second, I think that's probably where your question was headed. Keegan, do you have a format when writing copy for an ad campaign, or any advice with copywriting? Well, not so much a format. We have a process. We always start with words. We don't start with anything but words. Again, you're going to think I'm just trying to reinvent the past with my agency, and in many ways we are. We have tissue sessions. Tissue sessions were once the norm back in the day when, in fact, I've got a stamp pad here. I've got loads of stuff on it. Back in the days, you know, the Mad Men era, people would take stamps. It was called tissues, but it was, you know, it was thin notepads where people would sketch ideas and jot things. We still do those sessions. Now, we do those sessions on the screen as much as we do them in bits of paper. We do it with clients partly because it involves the client at a time where they can feel wedded to the idea. If they feel wedded and invested in the idea, when you next polish it and you come up with the next stage of the campaign, it's a bit cheeky, but they're automatically going to like it more because they'll feel like part of it is them. Which sounds a bit, you know, sounds like we're trying to trick them. We're not. We're trying to get everyone involved and excited, and I think that's a good thing. But when it comes to writing, the reason we do that, literally words on paper, is it avoids all of that horrible, nasty subjectivity creeping in, which I was touching on with the parachute slides. As soon as you show anything visual, whether it's a color or a design or even a person in an ad, the human brain believes it to be, or sees it as like a finished ad, and you can find things that you don't like, and the conversation can very quickly fall into the, this is, I think the idea is good, but I don't like this color, or I don't like this, and then you're in, like a mess, and no one wants to have that annoying conversation. With copywriting, we always start with our verbal tissue session. We try to articulate the headline, the statement, the positioning line, whatever it is we're working on, just, black type on white background, and we articulate it. Because once you've got that brand articulation right, you can then add all of the other kind of flavor to the ad, if you like. You can look at your art direction, you can look at your visual design. But we always start with the words. The only other thing we practice when it comes to words at GASP is an exercise we call trim the fat, which is to say, if you can remove a word from a sentence and you don't lose any meaning, you should. What you want to do is you want to just cut everything away until you're left with the purest, simplest articulation.
I think there's another one, right? Another question? There might be one more.
I can't see it on my screen. I mean, right. Can you read it out if there is?
Hold on a sec. I thought I saw one flash. No, I think that's it. Anybody else have a question? We'll make it the last one. Anybody else have a question? Because this has been fantastic. All right, let's do our big close. Everybody show themselves now. We're going to do the thumbs up. The thumbs up is a tradition in my class, and it is a way of thanking our guest speaker. Certainly, as we sign off, make sure you thank Giles for this session. It's nighttime over there. The kids are in bed. And he's here, and he's here working with us. And one last question: is it okay if they reach out to you on LinkedIn and connect?
100%. Yeah.
All right.
100%. Of course it is. Yeah.
All right. So everybody put their thumbs up now. Thumbs up. All right. We're going to take a couple. 1, 2, and 3. All right. Thank you so much, Giles.
Nice one. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. That was awesome, man. I loved it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Say thank you as you click off, and we will see you Monday.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Giles, if you want to hang on, I got it. Let's talk. That was freaking awesome, dude. By the way, in my marketing strategy class, the way I do that proper marketing, it starts with market orientation. Then I move into behavioral science for brands. I mentioned Shotton's books, Rory Sutherland. I mean, I go through a lot of those things, the Van Restloff report, that party cannon ad.
Wicked.
It's in my slides.
Cool.
And so I try to use as much of that stuff in that class. That's the class where I'm preparing them to go out and be proper marketers. And so we follow that. And then there's a practice side in my class. We do an 8-quarter simulation where they create brands. They're competing against one another in teams. It's really wonderful software that is really valid. And then the last project we do, we work with a client, a small business through our local chamber, and the students apply everything they've learned. They diagnose their business, they develop a strategy, and then they give them a 3-month tactical plan. And that is the last thing they do. So it's not just books, it's practicing what we've done.
Oh, that's so important. It's so important. And so, too few kind of do both. And I think it's a problem. I don't know you know what, Tom, I wish there were more